Nikon just dropped the firmware 3.0 for the Nikon Z8, and it's way more than a bug fix. We're talking a first for pixel shift shooting, autofocus updates, and increased operability and functionality. In this video, I'm breaking down exactly what's new in firmware 3.0, what it actually means for you as a Z8 photographer, and which features I think are going to make the biggest difference out in the field. Whether you're shooting wildlife, portraits, or landscapes, there's something for everybody. So let's dive into what Nikon just gave us and see if it lives up to the hype. So on June 11th, 2025, Nikon released their firmware 3.0 update for the Nikon Z8. That announcement came through a press release that was posted on their website, and also came with an accompanying website over here that provides some more visuals and a little bit more detail into what can actually be done and the new functionalities for this firmware update. One interesting note in here is that they actually have not scheduled when that release is going to come out. So they've just put it as releasing soon. Hopefully that'll be within the next couple of days, maybe even weeks. And I'll also be sure to provide links in the description below to both the press release and the website that they put out to accompany it. Along with that, I'll also produce some videos here once we get the update, and I can actually put that on my camera and provide some tutorials for how to make use of that functionality when it's available to you. So with that, we'll jump in here to the press release. I'm actually going to start with the ones that I think probably aren't going to have the biggest effect on me, and we'll work towards the bigger ones from there. So the first one being the additional improvements to the operability and functionality that this update provides. One that's kind of interesting in here that goes along with autofocus is that you can now give detection priority, not only when you're in autofocus, but also manual focus. So if you're, for whatever reason, needing to use manual focus, let's say to focus on a person's eye, that's going to help you be able to ensure that you're actually in focus on that eye when you're in manual focus. As to where usually with autofocus, you would just see the green box that pops up. It's red if you're out of focus, turns green once you're in focus. So I'm expecting you'll see that same functionality, except you'll actually have to be manually turning the dial on your lens to see that box go from red to green. So this first line here, it says you get detection priority. The second one is actually the one where it says that you can select those subject detection areas in manual focus. This one's also kind of interesting. For myself, it's probably not going to come into play that often. That is that you can now use your maximum aperture in the live view to focus. So if you've ever been in like a situation where let's say you're shooting at f8, but your lens is actually capable of f2.8. When you're in that live view mode trying to gain focus, a lot of the times your lens will actually open up to its minimum aperture just to help the sensor be able to bring in more light and get focus on whatever it is you're trying to focus on. So this is now going to work in the opposite way, where let's say you're shooting at f22, if your lens is capable of that max aperture, it's now possible that the live view could actually choose f22 and stick with it for doing its autofocusing. Again, that's my speculation of how that works. If you think differently or have a different idea of what that means, please let me know down below in the comments. This next one, magnification option of 400%. So that just means you can zoom way in whenever you're using your live view and just trying to see what your image looks like before you take it. And that can be chosen through your custom settings now and be applied through there. The next item, the patterns of focus areas available for the wide area autofocus settings have been increased. I thought they did a good job over here on this web page trying to show what that looks like. So they're just saying that you can go further out to your edges here whenever you're using a large area or a wide area autofocus mode. So apparently there's 135 different patterns that can now be used. We'll see what that looks like once we actually get the firmware update. The next item here, you get a slower release mode. It's being called the C15 option in your options menus. This is supposed to help make it easier to manage your shot counts. Along with that, you're also going to get a fine image quality setting that's now available. So that's touted as getting you an even better image quality whenever you're using a high-speed frame capture. So again, that's one of those, I'll be honest, I don't have a lot of information on, but hopefully we'll get more once the firmware update comes out, and they actually drop a manual for it as well. The next item here, use of an external microphone for recording voice memos. This is personally something I've never actually done, is recording a voice memo. So I'd be curious if any of y'all use these, what you use them for. Not saying that I would never use voice memos. It's just never something that I've dived into. So kind of cool that they now let you plug in an external microphone to do that rather than just having to use the built-in microphone on the camera. All right, so the next thing that we'll jump into, this is going to be these functions here that they're touting as expanding your image possibilities. So this is something I think, again, I'm not going to get much use out of, although as I was reading this, I did have one idea for it. The way that I read this to work is that if you're using NX Studio to go in and edit your photos, let's say you have what I would call in Lightroom as a preset, or just, a set of settings that you always default to when you edit photos. This is something that I read as being able to go create that in NX Studio and then save it off to your memory card to be able to bring that into your camera, essentially as a preset or a custom color control, as they're calling it. So that would allow you in the camera to actually already see what, I guess, your baseline edit is going to look like, depending on what your editing style is. I'm sure there's photographers that do portraits that this could be really handy for if they just want to be able to see in the field how their image is going to come out based on whatever type of preset it is that they use once they get into their editing software. Again, for me, I don't really use features like that since I do mostly landscapes, but it would be kind of cool to try out on a landscape, so I'll definitely give it a shot once this firmware update comes out, because in some ways it would be interesting to see kind of what the photo that I'm looking at and the composition that I'm taking, getting a first look at it, what it's going to look like when I'm in the field. Usually when I'm in like a sunrise or sunset photo, I kind of just know I need to bracket those images. So I need to get a long exposure and a shorter exposure, just so that I can make sure that I capture all of the detail in the scene. So for those, I really have just gotten to the point where when I approach the scene, I kind of just know I need to shoot it in a certain way, and I'm already thinking that through before I ever even get home and start editing. The next item here that they call out, not the top one to me, but definitely second, they added some more support for autofocus control. This one here is really cool to me. There's an in-camera focus limiter that they're now building in. So let's say I'm taking pictures of airplanes at an air show. My Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter actually has this just built into the lens. So there's a switch that I can throw on it that will limit the focus distance. So I think it goes from 0 to 10 meters and then 10 meters to infinity. Or I can just have it where I have the full range. So what this is essentially doing is allowing me just to limit this from within the camera. I'm assuming this will only be available on Nikon lenses. I'll be kind of curious to see how that part of it works when it comes out. But like it says here, it allows you to select or specify a minimum and maximum focus distance. So I mentioned airplanes as one area that could be really helpful. You can also imagine if you're shooting wildlife and you know roughly where your subject is going to be at in the distance. When you're trying to get that really fast autofocus to just lock on quickly, and you need to pull the camera up and find the subject quickly. If you've got it, let's say you always know that your subject's going to be 50 meters away. There's no reason that your camera should try to focus anywhere from 0 to 50. Maybe you want to make sure that it doesn't even try to focus from 0 to 30 meters. Maybe it's 0 to 40 meters. So then you're going to set that you want it to go from 30 meters, maybe out to 70 meters as the range. So anyways, that should help you increase your autofocus speeds when you do have those subjects that you know roughly about how far they're going to be away from the camera, and you just want to make sure that the camera can lock onto that quickly. So before we get into the big item here, If you're enjoying this video, you want to see when I get this firmware update and start doing tests, please be sure to hit the subscribe button down below. That'll make sure that you get an immediate notification whenever those videos come out. So let's jump into their biggest feature coming out in here, at least what Nikon's touting as their biggest feature. And that's going to be their continuation to evolutionize what they call pixel shift shooting. They jumped into it here on this page. They really dialed in here to call this out. If you're not familiar with pixel shift shooting, that was a feature that came out with the Firmware 2.0 update. So this is just a continuation, which is kind of cool to see what they're trying to do with it. It definitely is, from what I understand, the first time within a camera that's got pixel shift that there is now an option to apply that with focus shift shooting and your exposure bracketing. And that is kind of an interesting thing. Pixel shift shooting, to me, my experience with it, you have to have an object or a subject that you're shooting that is completely still. I know I've shown it before in some of my other videos. I had images from the Washington Monument where you can see like the flags moving, the lights in the monument that are up at the top for aviation turn on and off. It produces some really weird artifacts whenever there's differences between the images. So that's definitely one thing to keep in mind. I would definitely recommend watching my video on pixel shift shooting. And this is definitely something that I've talked with people in the comments on my videos about before. Is there a way that you could use that to focus stack? There kind of was. If you were, let's say, shooting one of these 180 megapixel images, you got to take a lot of photos to be able to do that and utilize focus stacking for doing that. And I mean a lot of images, because if you're going to focus stack, and let's say it takes 4 photos to go through and do that focus stacking, if I remember right, this 180 megapixel image takes 32 photos to be able to do. So you're doing 32, and let's say your focus stack needs 4 frames, 32 times 4. So you're going to go create 4 different images that are of this 180 megapixels, and then you're going to try to pull those into Photoshop and focus stack. So that was a manual way to do it. Did not ever try to do an exposure bracketing in the same way. You could go in, assuming again that your scene's not changing. You could technically go do that. Let's say for a landscape, you could have done a foreground set, so 32 images there, another 32 images with your sky, and try to blend those. That's definitely not something that I tried to do, mostly because when I'm shooting landscapes, usually there's some amount of wind, whether you like it or not, and that's just going to mess that image up. So I haven't had a lot of pixel shift shooting opportunities that have worked great. But I do think this image here that they show as an example with this flower, the studio settings are definitely where you can make use of this. So again, I do think it's a really cool feature. Just for me doing landscapes, aviation photography, a little bit of wildlife, it doesn't apply to me. However, I do think it's cool that they're trying to push the envelope with new capability to a camera. So with that, I'm really curious to hear what you're most excited about out of this firmware update. I'm also curious if you think there's something that Nikon missed. So be sure to leave that down in the comments below. If you've got any questions, I'll try to answer it. However, just know that the firmware update's not out. I haven't had the chance to play with everything, and I just wanted to give you my take on some of these new features that are coming and how they're going to apply to my photography. So while you're here, please like the video if you enjoyed the content. And again, just a reminder, please subscribe. I do plan on putting out that content once the firmware update comes out, so you'll be the first to know when I get there. And also, I want to give a big shout out to one of my subscribers, Chris, who actually messaged me this morning on Facebook asking questions about this. So I'll be honest, that sparked creating this video tonight. So y'all's comments do help me find content to go create, and I appreciate that. So thanks again, Chris. And with that, I'll see you in the next video.